Welcome back to part 2, lesson 10. Here we are with Sancho. Sancho is named for, you see in the parentheses there, Sancho Panza. From what story was Sancho Panza? Don Quixote, and I think it's very, very appropriate to this lecture. If you haven't read Don Quixote, you should treat yourself and read it. I love the book. My mother and father both always accused me of quixotic kind of thinking and behavior when I was a child and a teenager, and to a certain extent I still resonate deeply with Don Quixote chasing the imaginary windmills, right? So do we go from individuated, which many of us love to think of ourselves as individuals, to let's float this new word, emoji-ated, right? If we're willing to entertain that emotion labels an experience labeled as an explanation of affective experience, which is where I've been kind of leading, and that resonates with me, that I have these affective fluctuations and I need to make sense of it, so I use emotion labels, all right? But then when we started interacting virtually, we saw that we lose a lot of the facial cues necessarily, or the body language, so we started substituting in these technological devices called, well, in my day they were called emoticons, and we actually had to learn the configuration to type them, but then now we're replaced with selecting emojis, if you will. So what's the result of affect being communicated and assessed through this technology? And the information supplied to us based on the interpretation of the affective state, how is it different and how is it similar to old school way of just doing it human to human, right? Emotion has a potential to operate less and less at the level of the individual and more at the collective. And again, note that emojis are a structural system. And I know we argue we need more emojis for this, we need more emojis for this, but we're just building the structure up larger. It's still a structure that's being imposed upon us. And if an emoji doesn't exist, can we not feel it? And so we're talking a visual emotional label in terms of an emoji versus a verbal emotion label in terms of a word, but they still represent a structuralist attempt to rob us of our freedom and our autonomy, if you will, if you believe that from Lecture 9. So we select from a list of emojis. Is that different than selecting from a range of internally supplied generated emotion labels in the terms of language, in terms of vocabulary? So what's the difference and what are the similarities? And I think that's something that needs to be considered, right? So this physiology that's incorporated into technology, as we just described in part 1, increases in digital activity in our everyday life means that our technologies are playing an increasingly prominent role in the process of individuation. So is our individuation, our potential to individuate ourselves, being taken away from us? Is it being ever influenced by this technology? But is that different than growing up in a village in Great Britain in 1650? And if it is different, how is it different? And I think those are useful questions to ask, right? So this viable and realistic social psychology of emotion needs to understand that emotional activity, right, realized at the individual level, is a product of context, of bodies and technology working together in multiple, increasingly mobile spaces and time. And how is the experience of school and the experience of learning, our interpretation of education, changed over this last year when we've gone to almost entirely virtual modality? Wow. I don't know. I promise you more questions than answers. So is that different than it's always been? I mean, is technology fundamentally a different source of information than our conspecifics had 200 years ago or 5,000 years ago? And that's, that just sets up a nice debate or a nice argument. Is the way we interact with the information from conspecifics different than the way from information from technology? And again, that's a ponderable, not something to be immediately answered. And will the reconciliation of the bodily generated affect with technological information demonstrate a dominance of one over the other? Will one win out? Will it be a competition, or will it be a collaboration? And that's a scary thought, given human beings' propensity for competition and kind of refusal of collaboration. We might be in real trouble. Might be. So this leads us to our penultimate team assignment. What is penultimate? Next before last, right? So for homework 11, right, group level assignment, what do we know? Well, what aspects, mechanisms of technology affect your relationship with your emotions, and for better, for worse? And I want to hear a brief bit on how, right? So you can see Carmen 2 to flesh out this assignment. But basically what we're looking at is the physiological aspects of emotion. What does the changes in technology mean to that? So think about that and then respond. The second question to answer, one's sense, understanding, creation of oneself. So how does technology influence that? To the extent that it does or doesn't, right? And certainly it has a role in it. So third is the ability to engage others emotionally. How is technology either facilitated or detracted from that? So we're looking for an example and an explanation on each one of these. And then finally, will technology create space for increasing individualization or collectivization? Which way do you think it's going to go? Do you think technology is going to drive us into collectives and kind of, or will technology enhance our ability to demonstrate ourselves as individuals and experience the world as individuals? So are we going to become more individualized or more collectivized? But bring it back to the role of technology. Now, when I was in high school, my English teacher in 11th grade, Mr. McMillan, cool guy. I love Mr. McMillan. He was such a thoughtful guy, and he had us do so many fantastic readings. And McMillan, though, came from this point of view, this philosophical point of view, that we're becoming ants. And we're on a path to becoming increasingly collectivized, more and more ant-like. That is, we are members of the colony, and we fulfill our little ant-like function and do nothing beyond that. And we're increasingly structured and constrained in our behavior. Is McMillan right? I don't know. Is that the path that we're moving down, or is it not? And then the side issue is, do we believe that that would be beneficial, or would it be harmful, and based on what and who says? So there's your assignment 11, right? And so a closing thought then is regarding your homework 12. And you've been tasked with developing your definition of emotion as homework 12, right? So see Carmen about that. By now, I hope we've made a strong case of differentiating emotion and affect, that we have workable definitions of both, and that we are able to differentiate those. And this relationship between affect and emotion seems to be like the core area right now in the study of understanding emotion and understanding ourselves and our relationship to our emotion. It looks like affect is at the heart of that matter, and how we define affect is part of the deal, but then how we define emotion on top of that. Emotion and cognition are pretty easily separable, at least in some theories, but then again, maybe not so easy as it would first appear. So to the extent that one understands one's relationship with one's affect and one's emotions, there becomes a potential to have profound effect on the experience of one's past, one's present, and we'll talk about that in terms of being in the world, and then one's future, and that is like potentials and actualization of those potentials. So again, hopefully more questions than answers. And check out homework 12, because it's time for you guys and your teams to develop your own model of emotion. And we have examples that you can draw on throughout the course. So you could incorporate Confucian elements. You could incorporate elements from Plato. If what Ekman had for you resonates, if Darwin's thinking on this, maybe it's more modern. Maybe Matsumi was what resonated. But somehow I want you guys to work together, and I really have been trying to allow for or force kind of a community collaboration, albeit a small one, between groups of 4 or 3, however it shook out for you guys. But I want you to work on this together, and I want you to communicate about it, and I would love for you to think through it, and then present your own model of emotion as per the specifications in the assignment. So we got one more ahead of us, and I'm intentionally going to finish up with hope. So 10.1 is coming up, and saying goodbye to you for this episode, if you will, is Montana and Skinny. So there's Skinny always being crazy, and Montana, close friend to Hannah. So take the Hannah Montana reference as you will. I want you guys to have a great day.